Yes, sure. So should we, please, do you want to start? We haven't heard from many leaders so far.
Well, you're right in a sense. You're getting to the point of the matter, is do we believe in democracy? Do we believe that we should make our laws through an elected parliament? And do we trust people to reach a sensible conclusion? I do. I believe in democracy. Like Churchill, I think it's the worst system except for all the alternatives. You seem to think that we should rely on some unelected body because you think it will give you laws that you like more than elected bodies will give you. That's a point of view. It's not one that's borne out by practice, actually, because we talk about laws for women, maternity rights enacted by Parliament are far higher than those enacted by the EU. Anti-discrimination laws were brought in before we became members of the EU, none afterwards. So there's actually no evidence that the people of Britain want to impose on themselves you know, an absence of the sort of laws which you like and I like and most of us like.
Given that let's talk democracy, it's right that we come to Jan in the House of Lords.
Yeah, I know nothing about democracy. I would, of course, I'm I would of course disagree with Peter, because I think the fact many of these laws, yes, we did have some anti-discrimination laws before we joined the European Union, but they have been vastly improved by our work in the European Union with our colleagues in other member states. And the fact of the matter is that if the UK government can easily amend or get rid of these laws, but at the moment they are underpinned by European laws, and that gives them a strength. It means that the next government cannot just tear apart our 4-week holiday. They cannot tear apart our paternity and maternity laws.
We've had statutory holidays since 1938, and no British government has torn them apart.
We have not had a statutory 4 weeks a year holiday, and we did not have that until we joined the European Union.
Bernard, do you think that you
not everything the European Union does has been bad. It has done many good things that we agree with, that we will want to keep in our law. But it's not actually true to say that we don't have a constitution. We don't have a written constitution, but actually we do have a constitution that is partly written down, partly established by precedent and convention, and we do have very strong institutions in this country. In fact, our democratic constitution long predates many of the democracies in the European Union. And as chairman of the Constitutional Affairs Committee in the House of Commons, I take great exception to being told that we haven't got a constitution, because that's complete nonsense. The question is, whose constitution is it? The European Union certainly is a written constitutional construct, and it's one where none of the democracies individually in Europe can control any longer what happens in their own democracy ultimately. The European Union is made up of democracies. It's not actually itself a democracy. It's an extraordinarily unaccountable institution where the chief lawmaker is the European Commission, is appointed and virtually unremovable.
Yeah.
And the European Court of Justice is an international court which can even overturn the rulings of our own Supreme Court. In a democracy, the Parliament would make the laws and the judges would obey the law of the Parliament. If you think one day the European Parliament is going to be sort of like a massive national parliament, dream on, because the European Union has the Krassos, the power, but it doesn't have the demos, the single people that would make sense of a single European Parliament running a single European democracy. In any case, the European Union is not set up like that the Parliament appoints the Commission. It's much, much more complicated. Is there anybody in this room that really understands the Commission, the way the European legislative system works? It's completely, well, I've been studying this for the last 25 years. I think even I have a job explaining it to people, how the legislation is made, the system of co-decision and vetoes and qualified majority voting and all this. This is not transparent and ultimately not accountable, which is why the European Union, as an international government, has not had its accounts signed off properly for the last 20 years.
I think the final point is on Jan, and then we'll...
I'll just come back to Matthew, on 2 points there. The reason why we don't have an overarching democratic government of the European Union is precisely because it's not a superstate, and I'm sure that's something that we would not want. We would not want a European superstate. And I take issue with the fact that you say that the European Commission is the lawmaker. It depends how you defend the lawmaker. The European Commission drafts proposals, but it's up to the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament to agree those. It's not the European Commission. They are merely the proposing body.
They're the only body that can initiate legislation. And once legislation is in place, it's impossible to remove.
I was worried about how the audience. Should we take a few more questions? Yes, gentlemen here.
Yes, if I could just ask, is there a microphone?
There's one coming.
Oh, the right one. Yeah, my question is this. My name is Elliot Pyle. My question is this. It's very simple. I'm old enough to remember when we voted the last referendum. I'm even old enough to remember when this club was called and started as, I think, the Iron and Steel Federation. Then it became the Common Market. Then it became the EEC. Then it became the EC. Now it's the EU. Well, what we voted for under the Wilson administration is something completely different. This is a completely different institution. And what I find so irritating as a spectator, like spectators of the sport of the ins and the outs, no one talks about this. No one talks about the fact that this is not the institution that the founding fathers put together. And after 45 years or 40 odd years, it's morphed into something which is completely different and something which we didn't vote for. We weren't told about under the government and took us in. And no one talks about it now. And I think it's quite disingenuous. And I simply ask, why have we been dragged all these years into something which we weren't asked about, not even spoken about, not explained? It's completely different from what we originally did.
I'll stay down this side.
Yes, stay there.
I feel like that's something that's
Well, it is because I campaigned in 1975 for us to remain in the EU. I thought there was a good economic case, and it's true. I was influenced by the secretary of the Keep Britain in Europe movement who recruited me, who was an extremely pretty girl, who I subsequently married. So I've done very well out of Europe. But at that time, we convinced ourselves, and I was persuaded to convince others, that it was essentially an economic venture. It was worthwhile getting inside their very high tariff walls to their rapidly growing market. What's changed is that now they have very low tariff walls, averaging about 2.5% on the products we export to the EU, if we were outside, and we're growing faster than them. But what we didn't admit at the time, and I'm guilty of it, was that there was always a political agenda. I sort of read the Treaty of Rome, it was all there, and I said, oh, what about this? My elders and betters said, don't worry your little head about that, because they don't really intend to do it. They're prepared to put that aside in order to have Britain as a member. Well, they got Britain as a member, and they haven't put it aside, and it is the long-term objective to create a United States of Europe. It's a perfectly legitimate objective, but we at this referendum effectively have to decide what our relationship should be with this embryonic centralized European state. Should we be a component of it, as Texas is a component of the United States of America, or should we be a friendly neighbor of it, as Canada is, within the North American free trading area, trading freely with its big neighbor, but retaining its right to make its own laws, control its own borders, spend its own money, and ultimately make its decisions about war and peace. I favour us being more like Canada and less like Texas.
I would actually challenge some of the premises of your question, sir. I don't believe I went to work in Brussels as a journalist in 1989 for The Economist. After the second referendum, I don't believe for the British the EU has changed enormously since then, because the big change has been the euro, but we're not in the euro. The other big change has been the Schengen system of free movement, we're not in that. The third evolution, yes, has been cooperation on foreign policy, but we retain our veto on that, so nobody can force us to take any foreign policy we want. I mean, but don't forget that Britain, like every member state, on foreign policy, defence, treaty change, enlargement, taxation, what we do with our budgets, all our domestic welfare, health and education, we haven't given up sovereignty to the EU, so it's wrong that we've given up massive sovereignty. Just last point. I know that it suits federalists and it suits Eurosceptics to claim there's been a superstate being built in Brussels, but it isn't really true. I've recently travelled to several EU capitals in the last 2 weeks. Nobody there really wants a new EU treaty to create a more integrated system of government because the people of Europe don't want it. They don't want it, and they couldn't get it past the French Parliament or the German Parliament. So actually, we're stuck with the level of integration we have at the moment. The Euro countries may do a little bit more here and there to make the Euro more successful, but essentially, this great superstate is not happening. And people don't really realise that.
Sorry, if I could just come back just for a minute. Yeah, you're right. The people don't want it. It's the people who are running the club who are pushing it down our throats. And if I may say, I only read the other day about this European army. What do we want to do that for? We haven't entered. And I'm sure that it will be this country that will start paying the bill in the form of men and machines. Why would we want a European army?
As a former defence correspondent, I can't answer that. There is no European army.
No, it's been discussed. It's been discussed.
Politicians give Sunday speeches, they wouldn't it be nice ideas. In reality, nobody wants the French and the Germans and the British don't want it, it won't happen, it couldn't happen without Britain's consent, and we won't give it.
I do want to try and get as many questions in as possible.
Can I just deal with
We'll move on, but
I mean, this is absolutely the crux of the matter, is what did we join then and what are we in now? And